I'm super excited to be here today. I always like to say when I start these engagements that we all show up with the lenses in which we have experienced the world, right? And what do I mean by the lenses in which we've experienced the world? We all come from collective backgrounds, right? We all come from different places in the world that really craft us to be the people that we are. Sometimes not even the people that we are, but the things in which we actually are passionate about, right? And so I'm going to start off really quickly with my story so we can kind of tagline into today's presentation. So I always like to say, before we get into the fireside chat, I really come to stir our souls this morning to really think about the golden rule and what does that mean for us as professionals. So if you notice when I opened up, I talked about we all have a particular lens in which we experience the world, a particular lens in which we show up in the world. My lens started in Mississippi, in a rural town in Mississippi called Fayette, Mississippi. I grew up there in Mississippi in a single mother's home there in Mississippi in poverty. But one of the things I was fortunate enough to be reared by was a grandmother who understood the ability to impart wisdom and the golden rule of leadership. I want you to raise your hand if your parents, grandparents, mentors, anybody that you have encountered have told you, treat people the way you want to be treated. Raise your hands. That's literally everybody in this room, right? And so the lenses in which I've experienced the world, as I talked about earlier, I grew up in rural Mississippi in poverty to a single mother, but I had a grandmother who instilled that in me. And so many times as we are on this journey, right, of life, the journey of life where we were reared to treat people the way we want to be treated, we were reared to have that respect. Sometime along life's journeys, we experience bad experiences, right? How many of you all have had a bad manager in your career? Raise your hand. Absolutely. Absolutely. And so based on sometime those lived experiences that we've had, we all grew up with that notion of treating people the way we wanted to be treated. But sometime along life's journey, right, we experience bad managers. We experience life defeats. And those life defeats sometimes show up in the way in which we show up as professionals, the way we show up as managers. And so I want you to really think through today, am I really reflective on that golden rule of treating people the way I want to be treated? And that goes into leadership. As I talked about earlier, I started off with lived experiences, right? I talked about how my grandmother reared me to treat people the way I wanted to be treated, right? And along life journey, I experienced poor leadership. I experienced discrimination. I experienced all of those factors that will tend to knock you down as an individual. But I made a conscious decision on my professional career's journey of having experienced discrimination, had gone through being discriminated against, had gone through a lot of life's kickback in my professional career. I made a decision that if I ever got into leadership, I would not make those mistakes. And as a result of that, that is where this golden rule came into play. This theory that I've been writing on, I have a new book coming out about, is because I wanted to challenge leaders that if we take a step back, if we literally take a step back as human beings, and before every decision that we make that affects someone else, if we ask ourselves the question, if I was on the other side of the table, will I still make that decision? I talked about today, I wanted to stir your souls before we got into this fireside chat. When you leave this session, I want you to go back into your professional careers, and as you are impacting policies, as you're leading people, as you're leading change, and every decision that you are making, that impacts the lives of someone else, I want you to put yourself across the table and say, if that was me sitting across the table, if that was my mother, if that was my daughter, if that was my son, if that was my nephew, would I make that same decision? That will literally change your leadership journey. It would literally change your perspective. And so that's one of the things that I do in my journey. Before I make any decision, I put the ones that I love dear in that chair, in that seat, and say, would I make the same decision? And I want that to be your North Star as we talk about the golden rule of leadership. The other thing that I want to talk about as well is that we have, again, I said the lenses, the residue of our professional environments. And so many times we can walk into environments, and because of the work environment that we've been into, we show up a different way. We show up in a way that we shouldn't show up. We forget about that golden rule of treating people the way we want to be treated. And sometimes people say that empathy is weak. It is not weak. We as human beings have all experienced the same things in life. We've experienced death. We've experienced happiness. We've experienced promotions. We've even experienced demotions at times, right? So if we go back to the common core that we are more alike than we're different, and we show up every single time without the residue of the bad, because we cannot always, right? We cannot always control how individuals show up. When we talk about this golden rule of leadership, treating people the way you want to be treated, we can't always control the person on the other side, but we can control ourselves. So that leads me to my next point. When we show up in a different way, right? When we show up as the example, when we show up as the role model, then what happens? We then become that example, that North Star in our organizations, in our units, and in our perspective fields of influence. And so one of the things I want to really leave you all with, and I wrote these down, so I want to go and kind of go through them really quickly, is that I want you to ask yourself, as we're talking through this golden rule of leadership, did I listen today? So many times in leadership, we don't listen. We have individuals sitting across from us, and they are wanting to express themselves, and as leaders, what do we tend to do, right? We tend to want to talk about our leadership journey, right? We tend to want to share, overshare. But did we listen? Listening is going to be your North Star of this golden rule, because in listening, you will start to understand the person beside you. You will start to understand the person in front of you, right? You would then understand the lenses, right? Remember I opened up with we all have different lenses in which we've experienced the world. And believe it or not, you all, those lenses are going to show up in the workplace. As much as we say we want to put aside our professional and personal, the residue of the lenses in which individuals have experienced the world is going to show up. And so if you're going to be successful, it's going to be important to listen. The other part that's going to be so important is, did I make space for another voice, another perspective, right? When we think about this, I open up again with the lenses in which people experience the world. I tell my students this all the time, and they get sick of it. By the end of the semester, they understand it. The lenses in which people experience the world, they're going to show up in there. So did I make space for their voice today? Did I make space for people who don't look like me, who don't talk like me, who have had different life experiences? Did I make space for their voice today? And why it's so important to make space for their voices? because their voices are speaking to us. It's telling us how to interact with them. It's important. The other piece is, did I use my position to uplift someone else? So many times in leadership and in organizations, many of us are fortunate to have a particular circle of influence in our organization. I always say this as I travel across the country, that we all have been given a particular circle of influence, whether big or large, right? And in some form or fashion, how are you then using that to make room for someone else? So I want to go back over this really quickly. Did I listen today? Did I make space for another voice? And did I use my position to uplift someone? I want you all to write down really quickly, because this is important. I want you to write down one person that you plan to uplift and support when you get back to your places of influence. One person that you plan to uplift and make a commitment. And lastly, I wrote this down because this is so important. We do not need more bosses. We need more builders. Leaders who build trust, build people, and build belonging. And I'm going to walk through that really quickly. We do not need more bosses. I know we live in this glamorous world that everybody wants to ascend to the highest powers of their organization. I get that. My first senior leadership role, I was 30 years old. One of the youngest to ever had ascended to that role, so I get it. But when we think about bosses, I want you to think about it in the perspective of being able to build. My very first leadership team that I came on, as in my younger days, the reason why I'm using this quote, because that's what I thought. You know, I'm a boss, right? So my very first leadership journey, I'm going to share this story. I came in as a boss, right? With a boss mentality. I'm in charge here. And I quickly understood when I first came to the team, although I was young and ambitious and I had all these aspirations for my team, that I was not there to be a boss. I had a one-on-one with every single person that I was leading in that team. And I started to see my mother and some of the older ladies that was coming in, and they had aspirations to move up. I started to see my aunts and some of them. I started to see my uncles. And I started to even see myself and the younger people that were on that team. And I understood very quickly that in order for me to be successful as a 30-year-old boss in my mind, I needed to first build trust. They had the residue of, remember what I talked about earlier, the lenses in which they had experienced the professional world. They had that bad residue on them. And it took me always asking myself every single time, even when I was pressured to make decisions that I didn't always agree with, I would ask myself when I closed that door, if this was my mother, if this was my aunt, if this was my cousin, if this was the people that I love, would I make the same decisions? And every single time, y'all, that North Star kept my integrity, my character in check. The other piece that I talked about here, right? We don't need more bosses. We need more builders. We live in a society now that we are in the hustle and bustle of a very polarized society, right? With the social media area that we're in with reality TV, we are a very polarized society. We are. That's just the fact, right? And in this polarized society, we gotta start building people and building them in a way that is not about just the title of boss, but it is about the humanity of each other. And that's what I mean by building. And so that's one of the reasons why I ask you all to write down one person that you want to impact when you go to your prospective places of influence. And I want you to make a commitment to yourself and come back next year to this conference. And while I may not be the speaker next year, but I want you to come back and say, did I actually fulfill that commitment of building someone else up? Thank you.
Well, that was very inspirational. We appreciate that.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you. All right, everyone, we're moving into our fireside chat portion. At the end of this, we'll do a Q&A. We're welcoming any questions you may have. But I want to start with some audience involvement first. You know, we like to do engagement at ALA. So please raise your hand if you've ever had a leader who did not listen. Heard you, but did not listen. Okay, me too. Now, please raise your hand if you've ever had a leader who made you feel valued. That's right, I like that. More hands than the last one. Now, Dr. Malone, can you please explain to us the differences between the two feelings?
Absolutely. So you open up with your first question of being valued, right? It's very important that when we think about value, value is different for every single person. And so if you notice when I was talking today, I talked about building trust, building bridges, getting to know people, right? So in order for you to really understand what value is, Jenna, you also have to first understand the people in which you're serving. I've led teams where I valued money. So in understanding that I value money, that didn't mean that my staff value money. And so one of the things I learned very quickly was getting to know my staff. I understood that some of them valued their time, they valued words of affirmation. And so to go to the core of why some of you raised your hand that had experienced valued leaders and some not being valued. Number one, it goes from not listening and understanding the different perspectives, right? If I went and polled this whole room today, every single person have different values in things that they value. Some of you value time, so that may be a time off award. Some of you all valued money. That may be a bonus award. And some of you may even value affirmations. And so you have to know your employees as a leader to be able to provide that affirmations.
Okay. So, Dr. Malone, as law firm leaders, we are in an era of constant disruption. So you may not know this. Law firms change. We don't like that, do we? So we're in constant disruption. Hybrid work, technology shifts, generational change. How can leaders like myself and others in the room stay grounded in empathy and equity amongst all that change?
It's really being aware, right? A lot of leaders are not aware of the revolving world that's around us. As a college professor, I use what we call disrupted innovation theory. And disrupted innovation theory is taking all of what you all think is working and disrupting that. And you mentioned technology. Technology is disrupting the way in which we think about our businesses, our practices, right? Also, post-pandemic, the value systems of our society is changing. You mentioned hybrid work. So the value system is changing. And so I think we have to be very self-aware as leaders to understand the world is changing around us, and we have to really embrace that change, right? We look at the data when it comes to hybrid work, right? A lot of people are not going back to the office. They refuse refuse to. So you see entrepreneurship. My PhD is in entrepreneurship. We have over 1,000 students where I serve as an adjunct professor now that are coming to study what? Entrepreneurship, because they do not want to go back into an office. They want to start their own businesses. And so if we're going to be successful and we're going to get the brightest and the smartest, we're going to have to, number one, be informed, be very aware of what's going on around us. I always tell leaders it's like a 360 approach, right? Looking at every single thing and evaluating how does that work in the ecosystem of my firm, because every law firm is different. Some firms are in urban communities, some are in rural communities. And so understanding the makeup of the community around you and understanding the needs that you want to go. Also, another thing, Jenna, that is very important when I talk to organizations and corporate leaders, we also have to have a strategic vision for our organizations. Many organizations don't have strategic vision, and where there is no strategic vision, then you tend to run in chaos, right?
So Dr. Malone, you said before that empathy isn't weakness, it's power. Can you unpack that for us? Like, why do you believe empathy is one of the most strategic skills a leader can have right now?
Absolutely. Empathy is us understanding the humanity of our society. We live in a society now that humanity isn't always into play. I'll give you an example. I wrote an article about this. We look at the school shootings that are happening around the country, right? We talk about them on Wednesday, and lo and behold, by Friday, they never existed in our society. Empathy. It is one of the most powerful approaches as leaders. People want to know that you see them, that you hear them, and that you value them, right? It goes back to our core senses, right? Hearing, seeing, and what? Feeling. Hearing, seeing, and feeling. And so empathy is more important than a work schedule, is more important than a promotion. Because as all of us as human beings, we want to know, did you see me today? Did you hear me? And did you feel what I was saying today? Empathy is powerful.
Yes, it is. You also often talk about making sure everyone has a seat at the table. But you go further and say, now once they're at the table, they need a voice. What does that really mean in practice?
Absolutely. So a lot of times, we use this cliche of a seat at the table, and I talk about it in my book, and we bring people to the table because it sounds good, it feels good, right? But when we bring them to the table, we talked about this earlier, everybody have different lenses in which they show up. Sometimes we don't like what they say. How many of you all have been invited to a table one time and you were never invited back again because you expressed a view or something, right? It's happened to all of us at some point in time. And so many times when we think about it, it's not good enough for us to create tables just to have tables. The most effective part of having a seat at the table is really allowing that perspective to be implemented. And so how many times you all have completed surveys year after year, and you probably say, well, nothing ever happens with this survey. I'm going to stop, completing this survey. It's important that we bring people to the table and we use the data, we use the voices that they give so that we can really see the impact of that. And many times the reason why I say that it's important is because it's just not good enough for us to have a formal table without implementation, if that makes sense, Jenna.
Yes. Now on to equity and fairness. Let's shift. So many people use equity and equality interchangeably, but they're not the same, as you know. So, and sometimes that's how people lead. So now how can organizations like law firms take a hard, honest look at whether their systems are equitable, and where should they start?
Absolutely. So when we think about looking at equity, is really understanding who's in these spaces and places, understanding the makeup. And then it goes back to the strategic vision, as I talked about earlier. What is the strategic vision of your firm, right? Understanding that and making sure that it matches up with what's happening around us. And so, in many instances of doing that is engaging, and some people think that that is cliche, but it is important. Engaging and really listening to the individuals that are within your firm and using that data, as we just talked about, that seat at the table to frame up an equity framework. Because equity looks different in every place, every instance, right? And so it's important to, number one, Jenna, understand the makeup of your firms and your organizations. Number two, then get the input of your firm to understand what equity looks like, right? Number two. And then number three is implementation. And the reason why you all probably say, well, Dr. Malone left that very open-ended. I left that very open-ended because the definition of equity can mean different things to different places and spaces. And so, for example, there are some organizations who are focusing on getting more minority women's in because they did a analysis of their organization and knows they didn't have enough minority women in. Or there may be some organizations who say we need to focus more on a more diverse population. So what is diversity? We have to define diversity, right? What does diversity mean? Does that mean gender? Does that mean race? Does that mean age, right? And so it starts with understanding what that makeup is and implementing that plan. But number one, it comes with knowing your audience, knowing who's in your firm, because I believe equity is made up by the people in which you serve. Because equity comes into play because someone in the organization felt like they were treated what? Unequitable, right? And so that is one of the reasons why I led like that, because if there is a sense of unequitableness, then that means that we need to redefine how we're looking at this as an organization and corporation.
So you say the real measure of leadership isn't how many people we manage, it's how many people we lift. And you gave everyone an assignment here before we sat down of writing down one name. I challenge you to do two. So, but what does that really look like, lifting people?
Absolutely. When we think about it, we work with so many people who, I'm not going to let this go, y'all, who bring the lenses in which they experience the world into our spaces, right? And it's a real thing. The lenses in which they experience the world. And if we allow our humanity to be human for a moment, Jenna, then people are telling us how they want us to be, how they want to be treated, how they want us to show up. And it's important for us to always look for a way to build each other up. So many times, have you ever had one of your colleagues come to office and they're venting about wanting to move up in the organization, and you're on the other end as a manager, you're in the organization, you're already in leadership, but you're busy trying to get the next task done, been there, done that. Pause for a minute, breathe for a minute. I promise you that task is going to be okay. You're in that leadership role because you can do those tasks, right? It's going to happen. And listen to that individual and work out a plan that you can work with that individual. That will go so far. And my professional journey, I make it my, every year when I start the year off, I make it my business to think about at least seven. I believe seven means the number of completion. I think about 7 people that I can mentor, that I can impact, that I can help move to the next level. I believe that when we learn something, we should teach it. As Dr. Maya Angelou say, when we get something, we should give it. And that is how we have collaborative organizations and firms. You ever work somewhere and they say, well, we need to work on collaboration. We need to add this collaboration pillar. I promise you, if you help someone and you encourage that person to go and help someone else in the firm, I guarantee you that collaboration piece will be something that will be a model for other people to take a look at.
So on building culture, so Dr. Malone, you say culture doesn't shift overnight. It shifts decision by decision. Can you give an example of what one small intentional act of inclusion looks like that can completely change a workplace culture?
Absolutely. So when we think about, it's always been a whole lot of debate about the particular holidays in which we celebrate as teams, right? And organizations have their own holidays that they celebrate, their own appreciation months, and sometimes you have a standard, list that they give you, right? One of the things that I did, Jenna, in my leadership journey was I polled my team to say, hey, what is the most important traditions and holidays in which you all serve? Believe it or not, it was one of the official holidays on my list. It was Women's Month, right? But every single woman on my team said, I don't believe that we are getting the type of emphasis on it that we need. And I was able to then put together a strategy and a plan that we put more emphasis on it as my own internal team. So when I say that, it's important for us to really think about what are some small gestures. Again, I talked about earlier, getting to know the people in which you serve is important. Because sometimes when we think that we're doing that is magnificent, it may not match the team in which we serve. And remember, the teams in which we serve sometimes are smaller teams. They're not bigger teams, they're smaller teams, and they all come with a different perspective, a different lens. And so it's important to engage at that level so that then people will feel valued. Again, what I talked about earlier, people want those three senses, right? They want to feel seen, they want to feel heard, they want to feel valued.
So your message is about reimagining leadership. But you also challenge people to give a damn. A little plug for the book that will be later on. He'll be signing books for you guys later. In practice and not just in theory. What does that look like for someone who's ready to move from talking about equity to actually doing it?
Absolutely. One of the things that we do in society so many times is we all have something that we're passionate about, right? We do. We do. And those come from different experiences. As I talked about earlier, I grew up in poverty in rural Mississippi. Some days I would go to school and not know whether or not I would have food on the table to eat as a child. I grew up, getting hand-me-downs from my cousins. And so for me, I wanted to make a difference in my society. I wanted to give back in service. And in doing that, it's important for me to take the theory out of my mind and actually put into action. And so you have to be intentional about that, Jenna. I've been intentional about, writing grants and proposals, putting things in place, working and partnering with people across the country so that other students and other kids in rural parts of our country don't go through what I went through as a child. And so that challenge to all of you all, if you all noticed when I was speaking, we all have been given a circle of influence, some big, some small. And we have to think about how are we going to use that circle of influence to make a difference in the lives of other people. That can be from mentoring, that can be to finding resources to send your colleagues to conferences. That could be giving tangible goods and services, like my organization do, giving school supplies and toys to students across the country. But something tangible, something that you put in action. And so I would challenge you all to think about what you're passionate about and then write down one tangible thing that you can do, whether big or small, to make an impact on that thing that you're passionate about. It's important, Jenna.
It is. So I have one final question for you about your legacy. When people look back at your work years from now, from your books to your talks to this theme today, what do you hope they'll say Dr. Malone stood for?
For justice, for equality, for treating people the way I want to be treated. And not only that, but as a giver. So many times people ask me, Dr. Malone, you seem to be so blessed. You have all these different opportunities. And the reason why I'm so blessed and the reason why I have so many opportunities is because I give, I give, I give. And I feel like when you give, it always comes back in proportion.
All right, so now, well, thank you, Dr. Malone.
Thank you.
So we now open it up. Now we'll open it up to any questions that you may have for Dr. Malone on this topic or any other DEIA questions. Any questions? Sure.
I don't have a question, but I have a comment.
Okay.
How wonderful it is for young people to have a grandmother that relates to them, because there have been studies to show how much influence they have on the child. My son was very fortunate to learn working very hard and being ethical and being a good citizen from his grandmother. And it's wonderful that you had that opportunity as well. I wish a lot of other young children had that opportunity.
Absolutely. Since you brought it up, I'm going to say it. It's funny. Every time I speak, y'all, I invoke the spirit of my grandmother in speeches across the country. And I never thought I would be doing the work that I am doing. But my grandmother was born in 1914. In rural Mississippi, and she passed away in 2009. So do the math, right? She was 94 years old when she passed away, and she lived through, the civil rights movement. She knew Medgar Evers in Mississippi, and it is so amazing the stories that she taught me about humanity. She would always tell me, hold your head up, shoulders back, and make sure that you exude confidence, but you are never no better than anyone else in the world. And she taught me about being honest, right? One day I remember being in the grocery store and I found the $100 and she said, hey, we're going to take this to the cashier and say, somebody lost this here today. Teaching me about honesty and integrity. And at my age, I'm 39 now, going on 40 in April, I think about how she instilled so much in me. And that's why I show up in the world the way I show up. And that's why I've committed my life to the youth, because I know, to your point, many of them, they don't have a grandmother like my grandmother. And I was very fortunate and so grateful for the years that I was able to spend with her. Absolutely.
Question here?
You mentioned having people feel heard and valued. And then just to add to that, the benefits are just endless, because it makes for a happier work environment. It makes people want to go out of their way and do more, and just a more pleasant environment. And it just, the opportunities and the possibilities and the benefits are just so amazing. Why would you not want to do that? Like, the opposite is the negative. So why would you want a toxic environment versus a positive one? Those are the kinds of things.
It goes back to, culture. It goes back to lenses. And so many times I think about all the leaders that I mentor now, to your point, they are sending me notes. Oh, I did this survey. I listened to my employees, and sometimes you can't do everything that your staff wants to do, right? But if they felt like their voices was heard and you negotiated, you met in the middle, it's a win, right? So long story short, I think it starts with all of us in this room, right? Mentoring other people to have that mindset. You've had so many leaders who they lead from the top, right? It's my way or the highway. I'm the boss in the room. I said it. It's final, right? I don't lead like that. And sometimes, it irks the people who serve with me, because they're like, do we have to do a survey? Do we have to talk to the people? Do we have to go to them? Absolutely, we have to, right? It's important. Because when people feel heard, when they feel seen, they show up in a whole different way. And I've experienced that in my leadership journey. Absolutely.
Any other questions, comments? Yes, ma'am. Miss Stephanie.
A person who was born in Tennessee from the South, you're from Mississippi, that I think is even more so than Tennessee, but maybe not. From where you came from, did that change your perception for what you're doing?
No, people are people, no matter where we go. And as I open up early, with everybody show up with the lenses and the residue of the world in which they've experienced. And so we see in the South, people have had certain experiences when we talk about the racism, when we talk about the discrimination. But then when we think about places, for example, northern, they show up in different forms and fashion. They're still the same. When I was in Mississippi, I experienced discrimination. When I was in Washington, I'm still in Washington. In Washington, I've experienced discrimination. It just shows up in different forms and fashions. And I think for us, it is important for us to be very aware of that, how it shows up in all different places, and then find a way to say, how do I decrease that? How do I make a difference? How do I show up different? And I promise you all, this is not cliche. When you mentor and you open up the eyes of other people to think a certain way, they go and lead other teams with that imprint on them. And so that is important. And so, no, I don't think it shows up any differently.
Any other questions, comments?
That's a good question, because a lot of people think that it shows up differently. And for me, I started my first half of my professional career in Mississippi. I went to school in Mississippi. I was born in Mississippi. And I've been in Washington now going on 11 years. And it just shows up in different forms and fashions.
Got one more.
Just another comment. We come from law firms. And partners don't buy into empathy, equality, and inclusion. They reward the taskmaster.
Right.
They have to deal with one mean manager that forces people to do what they have,
Right.
doesn't listen to them, and people are afraid of being fired. So they don't buy into any of this. We all, as administrators, we buy into this, but they don't. So how do you deal with the person that's being rewarded for being a taskmaster and just taking no nonsense? People don't really want to work. You gotta, push into them.
One of the biggest things is when we think about that, middle level managers have the biggest influence on that, to your point. Middle level managers have the biggest influence. When I talk to middle level managers, I always tell them that your executives are going to give you the different priorities, the different ways in which you get to it. In many instances, most of them do not have the lenses or the experience or the range to tell you, to understand how you're going to get there. They just say, I want you to do X, Y, and Z, get it done, right? As middle level managers and even as some senior executives, you have the benefit of taking what they told you and then cultivating that into your team. And then when it's successful, many executives are not going to come back and ask you, well, how did you get that done? They just care that it's done, right? And so I think it's important to really think through how you receive your instructions from executive leadership and then dissect that down to where you are creating a culture where people feel seen, valued, and heard, and they're happy within those environments.
Yep, one here.
This is actually in response to Lou's comment. I agree with you 100%. If you want to refer to us as like middle management, hear what exists between like the staff and the owners, and what the owners say wouldn't necessarily go over well with the staff.
Absolutely.
Our job is to be the buffer.
Yeah.
Yeah.
To repaint that picture so that it's a lot more, like the staff's a lot more receptive in receiving it, because we know the staff, because we come from that world and we speak their language, but we are also, as you say, we have seats at the table. And yeah, I'll admit, I get in trouble for speaking my opinion at times, but that's my job, is to be the buffer and to take the message from the owner, repaint it, translate it into a language that the staff can understand and accept better than if it was the owners that would.
Absolutely. And when you stand 10 toes down for your employees, they're going to stand 10 toes down for you. And so even though if no policy is ever implemented, if they understood that you stood 10 toes down for them, they are going to have your back every single time, 100%. And where we go wrong is as leaders, we don't recognize our power, we don't recognize our influence. And so while change may not come by you saying anything, it is going to disrupt your team by saying absolutely nothing because they want you to be the advocates for them.
And when they recognize what you're doing, even if it's not necessarily the staff member, but maybe somebody that's a little bit above that person, they recognize your efforts.
Yeah.
They respect you and your job because they realize what your purpose is.
Absolutely.
Any other?
You know, this is the firm I'm at now, I'm there 6.5 years. And when I walked in the door, their culture was, when I tell you, really punitive. And yes, we have to carry the message from the owners, but I think it goes beyond that. You sort of have to focus on your relationship with those decision makers, and you have to get that relationship to a point where you are the influencer.
Yeah.
So that you can redirect those decisions that you know deep down inside are not the right decisions or not the right approach. And 9 times out of 10, you're doing it for their own good anyway, right?
Yeah.
I mean, as administrators, that's our job. But I've worked very hard on changing that culture, on pivoting them, and my relationship now with the partners is such that they don't make a move without speaking. And if I feel strongly about something, they really listen to me, and 9 times out of 10, they'll go with me.
Yeah.
So there's an investment in terms of that, because culture, as we know, is all set from the top, really. And you've got to work on that relationship. And once you build that business partner relationship and you're in a really good influencer position, then you can really, really exact change in terms of dealings with the employees, the relationships, how we treat people, all of that falls into place, I find.
You have 5 minutes.
And I've managed to be able to change a lot of those things.
Absolutely. That's one of the reasons why I stated in my speech is that we have to move from being bosses, get rid of our titles and be builders, right? And that comes with that relationship. When we have relationships with individuals, they tend to receive what we say much better. Have you ever received an email? Like if I sent you all an email today, you all are going to respond to me and say, oh, I remember Dr. Malone. Had I sent you an email before today with no interaction, with no type of impact, you would probably send me to spam, right? If you have to, seriously, relationships are key. They're key. Absolutely correct. Absolutely.
All right, so we have less than 5 minutes. Happy Builders Day instead of Bosses Day. So we're going to wrap up. But Dr. Malone, I really appreciate you for your time today, your wisdom, reminders, your golden nuggets. We really, truly appreciate you.
Absolutely. And if you all don't remember anything I say today, as you all go back into your perspective, circles of influence, I like to say circles of influence, right? Whether big or small, when you're up against making a decision for the remainder of this year, I really just want you to put the people that you love most in that chair and ask yourself, would I still make the same decision or will I change it? And I guarantee you will change the way in which you lead when you go back to your circles of influence. Thank you for having me.
Thank you.
Yes.
I wanted to make a comment. As a grandmother, it really warms my heart to hear you say what you said about your grandma, and I'm sure that she knew it in her heart that that's the influence she had on you, and I hope to be able to pass that on to my granddaughter.
Oh, thank you. Thank you.